You were saying earlier before the break that, the Philippines has to build on its strengths. And I was just curious about, from your personal perspective, because you've done business all over the world. What are those advantages as a British businessman sees it?
So look, I mean, my experience, of course, is working in the UK. I worked extensively in the Middle East. I lived in Saudi Arabia for over 10 years. I lived in Dubai, UAE, visited all through. And I've been in the Philippines close to 20 years. So I think the Philippines, first of all, I think number one advantage is the people, right?
That's why you married one, huh?
I hope this is going to be watched by my wife, darling. No, sure.
She's our number one ambassador.
Well, I do think actually that's a big factor, actually.
Yeah, the Filipinos living abroad, right?
I think Filipinos can integrate very well. So there's 200,000 in the UK. And people, I mean, I know of lots of friends who, of course, are wives of Filipinos, and we become friends. So what are the advantages? I do think the people is a key advantage.
Okay.
And that's also a bit of a watch out, so I'll come to that point. So I think the skills of the Philippine obviously English language, cultural, I think that's a key factor. The fact that you can easily assimilate with foreigners and foreigners can easily assimilate is a tremendous advantage. And you've got very high technical skills. I mean, obviously people are sought after the workforce in the UK specifically, of course, the healthcare sector, in shipping in terms of across the world, in hospitality and so forth. So the watch out, of course, is that you need to keep on, that your educational institutions are keeping up as well.
Right.
And that's a challenge, I think. And of course, the challenge is also you need those talented people here as well. Now, the reason I emphasize this, I think the Philippines has got those talents, and we've seen in the time that I've been here, the economy grow. Now, part of that is also to further support the infrastructure. And we know that the Philippines has definite challenges in respect to transport, public transport.
We're just coming off a strike recently, right?
Well, transport, because that was driven by the fact that jeepney people are concerned because they want to phase out those jeepneys and replace them with electronic or electric jeepneys. Yeah. So I think that travel and commuting here and infrastructure, and that's why it was obviously part of the mission under the Duterte, and obviously it's been mentioned, I think, in the State of the Nation address. And it's further emphasised the need to invest in infrastructure and e-infrastructure, or the internet. And when I talk about other companies, let's talk specifically about the UK, right?
Okay.
So, for me, and it's great to see the fact that the economic team, so that was Secretary Jokno, and I think people from the budget management.
Yeah, I think Secretary Pangandaman was in the UK.
Correct. Yeah? They all went to the UK. They'd obviously been in Davos.
That's right.
They went to Frankfurt, and then they went on to the UK. And that's great to see. And I was involved in one which took place in 2018. That was led by, of course, then Secretary of Finance Dominguez.
Right.
And obviously Secretary Lopez was there, the former DTI. But the thing is, you have to keep doing it.
Okay.
I mean, so for example, in the UK, I'm sure you'll have people from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Thailand, and you've got to try and keep this up, right? And the point I'm trying to get to is we need to keep the Philippines as a focus as well.
Okay.
And in that context, this is a 70 year of relations between the two countries. And I think we also have to be, candid or realistic. Obviously, the Philippines has long-standing ties with the United States, which we fully understand. And for example, the American Chamber, who we closely work with, is much bigger than our chamber, understandably so. So we need to kind of use our advantages and say to people, look, the Philippines is an opportunity to work. You've seen the workforce. Obviously, there's tremendous success in terms of the business outsourcing and so forth, but also there's opportunities in certain key sectors. And if you come back now to pushing that, we have to keep reminding people there are opportunities here.
Right.
And, you know, that we do it in our own way, as does the British Embassy here, as does the Philippine Embassy in London.
Right.
And they have a trade, Department of Trade or Trade and Investment section led by a lady called Michelle Sanchez. So, but and the reason I want to say this is I think sometimes with people, you know, oh, we've passed the law, so therefore, ergo, it should happen.
Right. They forget about the execution.
No, you got to pass the law and the implementing rules.
Right.
And then you got to work at it to get people to know about it and bring them in.
Refine it.
And bring them in.
Yeah.
So we welcome very much when these things are passed, and I think legislation is important, but it's only part of it.
Right.
And
getting it done is another thing.
Yeah, and you know, constantly trying to reach out, right? And that's why I think it's very important that we have the festival. And I'll give all credit to, actually it was to the ambassador, and particularly the deputy ambassador, a gentleman called Alistair White, who we're working with, who wanted to revive it. Now, it's a very short time frame compared to how we used to do it.
Right.
Hope we'll pull it off. But I think for me, these are all good things, but it's constantly trying to remind people, first of all, that there are a lot of British companies already here. And that's always good because success stories always helps going back. And then I think it's good because it creates more of an impact and you know, traction. So for me, it's about constantly highlighting, you know, you asked me why I came. Okay, so I came here because I fell in love with my wife, but I like the country. I mean, I've been here many, many times. I very much enjoy living here.
Yeah, and you could have lived back in the UK. I mean, right? I mean,
I think COVID is a good example because COVID obviously was a challenge to many people on many different fronts. But I think it kind of brought people closer to family, in my opinion, because you were cut off for a long. I mean, we didn't see our daughter for 2 years. I mean, we saw her virtually, but physically.
Right.
And that's why we spend quite a lot of time in Europe, specifically in Portugal, because we're closer to our children.
Right.
But now I've been back, and I really enjoy the Philippines. You know, it's like you've never been away. And that is, and a lot of people enjoy living here because it's, you know, the people are friendly. It's the atmosphere, right? You live in countries where you feel comfortable.
Right. But what would be comparable to the Philippines? A lot of people here praise Vietnam or maybe mention it when they say that it's moving along faster than the Philippines. I wouldn't say it's quite there yet, but it is progressing rapidly, right?
Yeah, I've been to Vietnam. I think Vietnam is, so first of all, Vietnam is the population, if I recall correctly, it's about 90 million.
Yeah.
The Philippines is now
110, something like that.
110 plus. One of the advantages Vietnam, of course, has is close to China. So
that's an advantage.
One of the discussion points was if companies wish to relocate or put factories, they'll move to Vietnam because it's very
across
close
the border.
to them. The other thing which I think is an advantage, as I understand, is that Vietnam can make very quick decisions on investments, where the Philippines, of course, in all fairness, has Congress, has a process. So for companies, of course, they like speed of decision making, right? So Vietnam is a challenge. And I think, I think what the Philippines needs to look at, which I think, in all fairness, it is doing, is to focus on what can we do well.
Okay.
What is our advantage in this, right? And that's why I mentioned Secretary Pasquale's article. I think that was very relevant, you know, i.e., let's look at these advantages of RCEP, of which there are
many,
very high number, and not to be constantly looking at, well, these are potential risks. So for me, the Philippines you know, look, it's come from a very challenging time. Obviously, the economy, GDP in most countries went down in 2020, which is the full year of the pandemic. Right. And we've seen recovery, and I think now probably you're looking obviously this year between 6.5% growth. Inflation is a key challenge, as it is in many countries. But I do think that the economy has come back probably stronger than anticipated.
Do you think we've turned a corner? I mean, the most recent inflation figures was, you know, a welcome improvement. That was followed a few days later, but, you know, the better than expected unemployment figures is that, you know, enough to worry, or I mean enough to say?
Well, I do think it is. I do think so. First of all, I'd say there's a couple of points. There are macroeconomic factors that the Philippines can't control.
Yeah.
Obviously, the single biggest impact a year ago was the start of the Ukraine-Russian conflict. That, of course, produced immediately impact on oil and gas prices, which have now started to stabilize because, of course, people are able to react and to plan. So, and of course, you're seeing that with oil prices coming down a bit. They sometimes go back up again. But so I think that's had an impact. Yes, I think inflation is beginning to turn the corner. I do think the growth in economic activity has come back. I think that tourism and visits has significantly obviously changed since the removal of travel restrictions. And there's still a lot of even more opportunities there, right? So yes, I think we have turned the corner. You can't negate the fact that the Philippines, as I said, doesn't operate in isolation. So if the US Fed tomorrow even will make a decision to increase interest rates, it will put pressure on the Philippine peso. But that's something you can do. But you know, in all fairness, whatever Secretary Jokno and Medalla, who's the BSP governor, can do is focus on what they can do.
Right.
But I do think it's happening, and I do think the government has taken steps on food importation, which of course is a key factor. And in that respect, obviously, British companies, particularly on our side in terms of pork, because we deal with that, has particularly seen a big increase in exports last year, up 34%.
Yeah. All right. We'll take another quick break with Mr. Chris Nelson of the British Chamber. This is Business and Politics on SMNI.